glowed with inner light, and they moved with a grace that made human vessels look like floating bricks. There were hundreds of them, arranged in perfect formation, and they were heading toward Earth. "Sir," said Lieutenant Maria Santos, her voice tight with fear. "They're hailing us." Daniel nodded. "Put it through." The alien that appeared on screen was tall and thin, with skin that looked like polished silver. Its eyes were completely black, and when it spoke, its voice sounded like metal scraping against stone. "Primitive species," the alien said. "I am High Commander Zolthar of the Valorian Empire. Your world now belongs to us. You will surrender immediately. You will give us your resources, your technology, and your people. If you refuse, we will burn your cities and harvest your corpses for fuel. You have one rotation of your planet to comply." The transmission ended. Daniel stood very still for a long moment. Around him, his crew was silent. He could see the fear on their faces. He could feel his own heart beating fast in his chest, but he did not let any of that show. "Open a channel," he said quietly. Maria's hands were shaking, but she did as he asked. "Channel open, sir." Daniel looked at the screen where the alien fleet waited. He thought about his daughter, who lived in Seattle with her husband and 2 children. He thought about his wife, who had died 3 years ago and whose ashes he had scattered over the farm where they had met. He thought about all the people on Earth who had no idea that their lives were about to change forever. "This is Captain Daniel Hayes of the United Nations Space Command," he said. "We receive your message. We would like to request diplomatic talks to discuss a peaceful resolution to this situation." He waited. The alien commander appeared again, and this time Zolthar was smiling. At least Daniel thought it was a smile. It was hard to tell with a face like that. "Diplomacy," Zolthar said, and there was something like laughter in his voice. "How predictable. How weak. Let me show you what happens to species that try to negotiate with the Valorian Empire." The screen went dark. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Maria screamed, "Sir, one of their ships is firing. They're targeting Orbital Station 7. Daniel watched in horror as a beam of pure white light shot from the lead Valorian ship. It crossed the vast distance of space in less than a second and struck the station directly. The station was home to 400 people, scientists, engineers, families, children. Daniel knew some of them personally. Lisa Morgan had just celebrated her 28th birthday last week. She had sent him a message thanking him for the gift he had shipped to her. The station exploded in a ball of fire that was immediately swallowed by the vacuum of space. One moment, it was there. The next moment, it was gone. 400 lives ended in the time it took to blink. "That was a warning," Zolthar said, his image appearing on screen again. "The next shot will hit one of your population centers. Surrender now or watch your species burn." Daniel did not respond. He could not respond. His throat was tight, and his hands were clenched into fists at his sides. Around him, his crew was weeping or staring in shock. Someone was praying quietly in the corner. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on all of them like a physical force. But something else was happening too. Something that Daniel had seen before in the eyes of soldiers who had watched their friends die. The fear was still there, but it was changing. It was hardening into something else. Something colder, something more dangerous. He turned away from the screen and walked to the communication console. His fingers moved across the controls, opening a channel to Earth, specifically to the office of Admiral Kevin Brooks, commander of all human defense forces. "Admiral," Daniel said, "this is Captain Hayes. I'm transmitting the footage of what just happened. The aliens have destroyed Orbital Station 7 with all hands. They're demanding our surrender." There was a long pause. When Brooks spoke, his voice was calm, but there was iron underneath it. "What are your orders, sir?" Brooks did not hesitate. "Fall back to the defensive perimeter around Mars. Do not engage unless fired upon. I'm declaring a state of emergency and mobilizing all forces. And Captain? Yes, sir. Send a reply to these aliens. Tell them we received their message. Tell them we understand their terms. And tell them this: they have made a terrible mistake. Daniel felt something shift in his chest. The fear was still there, but it was no longer the loudest thing in his heart. Now there was something else. Something that humans had carried with them since the first time one of their ancestors had picked up a rock and decided to fight back against a predator instead of running. He opened the channel to the Valorian fleet. "Hi, Commander Zolthar," he said. "This is Captain Daniel Hayes. We have received your warning. We have watched you murder 400 innocent people. We will not surrender. We will not kneel. And we will not forget what you have done today." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was quiet but absolutely certain. "You have made a terrible mistake." The transmission ended. Daniel turned to his crew, and for the first time since the aliens had appeared, he smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who had just made a decision that would change everything. "Set course for Mars," he said. "We have a war to fight." The Galactic Council met in a station that floated between 3 dead stars. The station was older than most civilizations, built by a species that had vanished long before the current powers had learned to use fire. Now it served as neutral ground, a place where the great empires could meet and talk without the threat of violence. Representatives from a dozen species filled the observation chamber, watching the events unfold on the screens before them. Ambassador Threll of the Nexari Collective stood near the back of the room. He was old, even by the standards of his long-lived species. His skin had faded from bright green to a dull gray, and his 4 eyes no longer worked as well as they once had. But his mind was still sharp, and what he was seeing on the screens troubled him deeply. The Valorian Empire was attacking a species called humans. This was not unusual. The Valorians attacked someone almost every cycle. What was unusual was how the humans were responding. They were not surrendering. They were not begging for mercy. They were fighting back. "Fascinating," said Ambassador Korath of the Hive Mind, his voice buzzing through the translator implant in Threll's ear. "This species has no chance of victory, yet they continue to resist. Their psychology must be defective." Threll said nothing. He was watching the human ships on the screen. They were ugly things, made of metal and fire, nothing like the elegant vessels of the elder races. But they moved with purpose. They moved like predators. The Council had invited a human representative to explain their species. She arrived 3 days later, transported on a Nexari diplomatic vessel. Her name was Dr. Amy Carter, and she was a xenobiologist who had spent her career studying alien life. She was short and pale, with brown hair that she kept tied back from her face. She looked small and fragile compared to the massive forms of the other ambassadors. But when she spoke, her voice did not shake. "Thank you for this opportunity," she said, standing at the center of the chamber with a dozen alien eyes fixed upon her. "I understand you want to know about humanity. I will try to explain, but I warn you, you may not like what you hear." She pressed a button on the device in her hand, and images began to appear on the screens around the room. Images of Earth. "This is our homeworld," she said. "We call it Earth. It looks peaceful from space, but it is one of the most dangerous planets in the galaxy. Our world has extreme temperatures, from frozen poles to burning deserts. We have earthquakes that can level cities. We have volcanoes that can block out the sun. We have storms that can destroy entire regions, and we have predators, so many predators." The images changed, showing creatures with teeth and claws and hunger in their eyes. "We evolved on a world that was trying to kill us every single day," Amy continued. "We had no natural weapons, no claws, no venom, no armor. We were small and weak compared to the things that hunted us. But we survived. Do you know how?" No one answered. The silence in the chamber was complete. "We became more dangerous than anything else on our planet," Amy said. "We learned to make tools, weapons. We learned to work together, to hunt in groups, to communicate and plan and adapt. We developed something called endurance hunting. We would chase our prey for hours, sometimes days, until the animal collapsed from exhaustion. We could not outrun them. We could not outfight them. So we simply refused to stop until they died." Ambassador Korath made a sound of disbelief. "That is impossible. No species can maintain pursuit for that long." Amy smiled. It was not a friendly smile. "Humans can run for days without stopping. We can survive wounds that would kill most species. We can function without sleep for extended periods. We can eat almost anything organic and survive in almost any environment. And we recover. Break a human bone, and it will heal stronger than before. Damage a human mind, and it will find a way to keep functioning. We are not the fastest species or the strongest species. But we might be the most stubborn species in the galaxy." She pressed another button, and new images appeared. Images of war. Human war. "But here is what you really need to understand," she said. "We did not just fight predators. We fought each other. For thousands of years we have been killing our own kind. We have developed weapons that can destroy cities in seconds. We have created poisons that can end civilizations. We split the atom and used it as a weapon. Against ourselves. Twice." The chamber was very quiet now. Threll could see the other ambassadors exchanging glances. They were beginning to understand, and what they were understanding frightened them. "When the Valorians arrived," Amy said, "they saw a young species with primitive technology. They thought we would be easy to conquer. They were wrong. They were so very wrong, because they did not understand what we are. We are not a peaceful species that forgot how to fight. We are a species that has been fighting since before we learned to speak. War is in our blood. It is in our bones. It is in every part of what we are." She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of every ambassador. "The Valorians killed 400 of our people, innocent people, families, children. They thought this would make us afraid. They thought this would make us surrender. Instead, they made us angry. And you do not want to see what humans do when they are angry." Threll finally spoke. His voice was quiet, but it carried through the chamber. "If your people are so dangerous," he asked, "why have you not conquered your own galaxy? Why have you stayed on your small world instead of taking what you could take?" Amy looked at him. There was something in her eyes that Threll could not read. Something sad and something proud, all mixed together. "Because we knew what we were," she said. "We knew how dangerous we could be. We were trying to be better. We were trying to leave our violent past behind and become something more peaceful. We reached for the stars hoping to find friends, not enemies." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was hard. "But the Valorians did not give us that choice. They attacked without warning. They murdered our people without mercy. They declared war on a species that has been perfecting the art of war for 10,000 years. She turned off the display and faced the council directly. "You asked me to explain humanity. Here is my explanation. We are the children of a death world. We are the survivors of 1,000,000 years of violence. We are the descendants of hunters and warriors who refused to die no matter what the universe threw at them. And now someone has given us a reason to fight." She walked toward the exit, then stopped and looked back over her shoulder. "I suggest you stay out of our way." Threll watched her go. Around him, the other ambassadors were speaking in rapid, frightened voices. They were calling for emergency sessions, for defensive preparations, for anything that might protect them from what was coming. But Threll just stood there, thinking about what he had seen in the human woman's eyes. She had not been threatening them. She had been warning them, because she knew what her species was capable of, and some part of her was afraid of it too. The war between humanity and the Valorian Empire had just begun. And Threll was suddenly very glad that his species had not been the ones to start it. The Valorians expected a quick and easy campaign. They had conquered hundreds of worlds using the same simple strategy. Arrive with overwhelming force, destroy any resistance, accept surrender, move on to the next target. It had worked every time for 3,000 years. It did not work against humans. Lieutenant Commander Ben Cooper was 34 years old and had spent most of his career studying submarine warfare. It was an old form of combat, developed centuries ago when humans still fought their wars on the surface of their own planet. The basic idea was simple. Stay hidden, strike fast, disappear before the enemy can respond. When his commanders asked him to adapt these tactics for space combat, Ben smiled and said he would be happy to help. The first attack came 3 weeks into the war. A Valorian supply convoy was moving through the outer reaches of the solar system, bringing weapons and fuel to the invasion fleet. They were not expecting trouble. The human forces had retreated to their defensive positions around Mars, and the convoy was far from any known enemy vessels. Ben's ships were waiting in the shadow of an asteroid. They were small and ugly, with hulls painted black to blend into the darkness of space. Their engines were designed to run cold, producing almost no heat signature. To Valorian sensors, they looked like nothing at all. The attack lasted 4 minutes. Ben's ships emerged from hiding, fired everything they had, and vanished back into the asteroid field before the Valorians could respond. When the shooting stopped, half the convoy was destroyed, and the rest was scattered and confused. High Commander Zolthar received the news with disbelief. His species had never encountered tactics like this. In Valorian culture, war was a formal affair. Fleets met in open space, exchanged fire according to established rules, and the stronger force won. The idea of hiding and ambushing was seen as cowardly and dishonorable, but humans did not care about Valorian honor. They cared about winning. On the colony world of New Austin, things were even worse for the invaders. The Valorians had landed troops expecting to occupy a peaceful farming community. What they found instead was a nightmare. Katie Sullivan was 46 years old. She had served in the Marines for 20 years before retiring to open a bakery in the town of Riverside. She had hoped to spend the rest of her life making bread and watching her grandchildren grow up. When the alien ships appeared in the sky, she put on her old uniform, grabbed her grandfather's hunting rifle, and went to work. Within 3 days, she had organized a resistance network of over 200 civilians. They were not soldiers. They were farmers, teachers, mechanics, and shopkeepers. But they knew the land, they knew how to shoot, and they knew that their families were counting on them. The Valorians had armor and energy weapons and thousands of years of military experience. Katie's people had homemade explosives, knowledge of the terrain, and a complete refusal to give up. The first Valorian patrol to enter Riverside was destroyed by a bomb made from fertilizer and fuel. The second patrol was picked off one by snipers hiding in the hills. The third patrol was led into a canyon where the walls collapsed on top of them. Zolthar sent more troops. Katie's people killed them too. Colonel Greg Patterson watched the reports coming in from across the solar system and allowed himself a small smile. He was sitting in a bunker beneath the Rocky Mountains, surrounded by screens and computers and the best military minds humanity had to offer. His job was to coordinate the defense of Earth, and he was very good at his job. The Valorians were predictable. They always attacked in formation. They always followed the same protocols. They always expected their enemies to behave in rational ways. Greg had studied their tactics carefully, and he had found the weakness at the heart of their strategy. They did not understand chaos. Human warfare was messy and unpredictable and constantly changing. Humans improvised. Humans adapted. Humans did things that made no logical sense and somehow won anyway. The Valorians could not process this. Every time they developed a counter-strategy, the humans did something completely different. The turning point came 6 weeks into the war. A Valorian battleship had captured a human colony transport carrying 2,000 civilians. Most were families traveling to a new settlement on one of Jupiter's moons. High Commander Zolthar sent a message to Earth. Surrender immediately, or the civilians would be executed one by one until humanity submitted. Admiral Kevin Brooks received the message in his command center. He read it twice, then called for Special Forces Commander Nicole Harris. Nicole was 38 years old and had been training for missions exactly like this her entire career. She was calm, professional, and completely without fear. When Brooks explained the situation, she did not hesitate. "I need 40 volunteers," she said. "We leave in 6 hours." The mission was supposed to be impossible. The Valorian battleship was enormous, heavily armored, and surrounded by escort vessels. The civilians were being held in the center of the ship, protected by hundreds of guards. No one had ever successfully boarded a Valorian vessel during combat operations. Nicole did not care about what was supposed to be impossible. Her and producing consumer goods switched to making weapons. Scientists who had been working on peaceful research began developing new ways to kill the enemy. Katie Sullivan, still fighting on New Austin, heard the news and laughed. She had known from the beginning that humanity would not surrender. They had been fighting impossible odds for their entire existence. This was just one more battle in a war that had started before humans even left their caves. Colonel Greg Patterson looked at the reports from across the solar system and began planning the next phase of the war. The Valorians had expected easy prey. Instead, they had found something else entirely. They had found humanity, and humanity was just getting started. 6 months into the war, the Valorian Empire began to understand the full weight of their mistake. They had not attacked a primitive species waiting to be conquered. They had awakened something old and terrible, something that had been sleeping beneath the surface of a small blue planet at the edge of known space. High Commander Zolthar stood on the bridge of his flagship and stared at the reports coming in from across the front lines. Every day brought news of another defeat. His supply lines were being cut by human raiders who appeared from nowhere and vanished before his ships could respond. His ground forces on occupied worlds were being destroyed by civilians who refused to surrender. His officers were growing afraid, and fear was something Valorians did not know how to handle. Captain Scott Miller was 31 years old and commanded a cruiser called the Defiant. His ship was old and battered, held together by patches and prayers and the determination of his crew. They had been fighting continuously for 4 months, and every member of his crew had lost someone they loved to the Valorian invasion. They were tired. They were hurt. And they were absolutely refusing to quit. The battle near Jupiter's moon of Europa should have been a Valorian victory. They had 20 ships against Scott's 4. They had superior weapons, superior shields, and 3,000 years of tactical experience. They had every advantage except one. They did not understand humans. The Defiant was hit early in the fight. A Valorian beam weapon tore through the engine section, killing 12 crew members and leaving the ship drifting helplessly in space. Any rational commander would have ordered his crew to abandon ship. Scott Miller was not feeling particularly rational. He gathered his remaining crew on the bridge and explained the situation. The engines were gone. The weapons were failing. They had no way to escape and no way to fight. But they did have one option left. The Defiant still had maneuvering thrusters, and they were very close to a Valorian command ship. Scott asked for volunteers. Every single person on his crew raised their hand. They called it the Ram. The Defiant accelerated directly toward the Valorian vessel, using its last reserves of power to build up speed. The Valorians tried to destroy them, but the Defiant was too close and moving too fast. The collision tore both ships apart in a massive explosion that was visible from Earth. Scott Miller and his crew died instantly. So did 800 Valorian soldiers. The human fleet won the battle. News of the Ram spread through the military. Other captains began developing similar tactics. Damaged ships that could no longer fight became weapons themselves, crashing into enemy vessels rather than retreating to safety. The Valorians called this insane. Humans called it taking one for the team. Dr. Paul Henderson was not a soldier. He was a physicist who had spent his career studying sound waves and their effects on different materials. Before the war, his research had been used to develop better speakers and hearing aids. Now he was working in a secret facility beneath the Nevada desert, and his research was being used to develop weapons. The Valorian ships were made of a crystalline material that was stronger than any metal known to humanity. Human weapons could damage them, but destroying them required massive amounts of firepower. Paul had been asked to find a better way. He worked for 3 months without rest, running experiments and analyzing data and drinking more coffee than any human should consume. His breakthrough came at 2 in the morning on a Thursday, when he accidentally knocked over a tuning fork and watched a sample of Valorian crystal shatter into dust. Sound waves. The crystalline structure of Valorian ships was vulnerable to specific frequencies of sound. Find the right frequency, and the ships would destroy themselves. Within weeks, Earth's forces had new weapons that could shatter enemy vessels like glass. The first time they were used in combat, an entire Valorian squadron was destroyed in seconds. High Commander Zolthar lost 36 ships before he even understood what was happening. The Galactic Council was watching all of this with growing alarm. Species that had observed the war with amusement were now watching with fear. The humans were not just defending themselves, they were winning. And there was no sign that they intended to stop. Ambassador Threll requested a meeting with Admiral Kevin Brooks. He traveled to Earth on a diplomatic vessel, landing in a city called Geneva that the humans used for important negotiations. The city was beautiful, filled with old buildings and quiet streets and people who walked without fear, despite the war raging above their heads. Threll found this deeply unsettling. Admiral Brooks met him in a conference room with windows that looked out over a lake. Brooks was tall and thin, with gray hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. He wore his uniform like it was part of his skin. Threll noticed that he carried no weapons, but somehow this made him seem more dangerous rather than less. "Ambassador," Brooks said, shaking Threll's hand in the human fashion. "Thank you for coming. I understand you want to discuss a ceasefire." Threll nodded. "The Galactic Council is concerned about the direction of this war. We believe it would be in everyone's interest to end the fighting and return to peace." "Peace," Brooks repeated. He walked to the window and looked out at the lake. "That's an interesting word. Tell me, Ambassador, what does the Council think peace should look like?" Threll explained the proposal. Both sides would withdraw to their pre-war positions. The Valorians would give up their claims to human territory. The humans would agree not to pursue further conflict. Everything would go back to the way it was before. Brooks listened in silence. When Threll finished, the Admiral turned to face him. "The Valorians killed 400 of our people without provocation," he said. "They threatened to murder our children. They thought we would be easy prey. They thought we would kneel." His voice was calm, but Threll could hear the steel underneath it. "We are not going to kneel. We are not going to accept a return to the status quo. We are going to end this war on our terms, and our terms are simple." Threll felt a chill run through his body. "What are your terms?" Brooks looked at him with eyes that held no mercy. "Unconditional surrender," Threll tried to argue. He explained that the Valorian Empire was ancient and proud, that they would never accept such humiliating terms, that the war would continue for years and cost millions of lives on both sides. Brooks listened patiently, then shook his head. "The Valorians made their choice when they attacked us," he said. "Now we are making ours. We are going to break their empire. We are going to free every species they have enslaved." And we are going to make sure that no one in this galaxy ever thinks about attacking humanity again." He walked Threll to the door. "Go back to your council, Ambassador. Tell them what I told you, and tell them to stay out of our way." Threll left Earth that night. As his ship climbed through the atmosphere, he looked down at the blue planet below. It looked so peaceful from space, so small and fragile. But he knew now what lived beneath that peaceful surface. He had seen it in Admiral Brooks' eyes, the same thing he had seen in Dr. Carter's eyes months ago. Not anger, exactly. Not hatred. Something colder than that. Something more patient. Humans called it resolve. And Threll was beginning to understand why the galaxy should be afraid of it. The final battle took place in the skies above the Valorian homeworld. It was a planet of silver towers and crystal gardens, a place that had known nothing but peace and prosperity for thousands of years. The Valorian people had grown up believing they were the masters of the galaxy, that no force in the universe could ever threaten their perfect civilization. They were about to learn how wrong they were. High Commander Zolthar had gathered every ship that remained in his fleet. 300 vessels, each one a masterwork of Valorian engineering, each one crewed by soldiers who had been trained from birth for combat. It was the largest military force the Empire had ever assembled in one place. Zolthar stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the stars, waiting for the enemy to arrive. He did not wait long. Admiral Kevin Brooks arrived with the full might of humanity at his back. The human fleet was not beautiful like the Valorian ships. It was rough and ugly and scarred from months of continuous fighting, but it was massive. Ships that had been under construction for decades had launched early, their crews working around the clock to make them battle-ready. Vessels that should have been retired years ago had been pulled from storage and fitted with new weapons. Civilian freighters had been converted into carriers, their cargo holds filled with fighter craft. Mining ships had been armed with rail guns. Research stations had been turned into mobile weapons platforms. Humanity had mobilized completely, and the result was the largest military force the galaxy had ever seen. Captain Daniel Hayes stood on the bridge of the USS Liberty, watching the enemy fleet through the main screen. He had been fighting since the first day of the war, when the Valorians had destroyed Orbital Station 7 and killed 400 innocent people. He had lost friends in the months since then. He had seen things that would haunt him for the rest of his life. But he had also seen what humanity could do when it stopped being afraid and started fighting back. "All ships report ready, Admiral," said Lieutenant Maria Santos, who had served with Daniel since the beginning. Her voice was calm now. The fear that had shaken her on that first day was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence that Daniel found deeply reassuring. Admiral Brooks's voice came through the communication system, broadcast to every ship in the fleet. "This is Admiral Brooks. Today we end this war. Today we show the galaxy what happens when you attack humanity. Today we fight not just for ourselves, but for every species that has suffered under Valorian tyranny. Give them no quarter, take no prisoners, and make them regret the day they ever heard our name." The battle began. Human ships surged forward in formations that had been practiced 1,000 times. Fighter craft launched in waves, their pilots flying with a precision that would have been impossible just months ago. The new sonic weapons fired, and Valorian vessels shattered like glass sculptures hit with hammers. Missiles and railgun rounds and energy beams crossed the void between the fleets, filling the darkness with fire and death. The Valorians fought back with everything they had. Their weapons were still powerful, still capable of destroying human ships with single shots. But they were outnumbered now, and outmaneuvered, and facing an enemy that simply refused to stop. For every human ship that fell, 2 more took its place. For every tactic the Valorians tried, the humans had a counter. Zolthar watched his fleet being torn apart and felt something he had never experienced before. Fear. Real fear. The kind that made his hands shake and his mind go blank. He ordered his ships to form a defensive ring around the planet. If they could not win, they would at least protect their home world. But the human fleet did not attack the planet. They did not need to. They simply kept destroying Valorian ships until there were none left to fight. The battle lasted 3 hours. When it ended, the Valorian fleet existed only as debris floating in the void above their world. Zolthar was captured alive on his burning flagship. Human soldiers found him on the bridge, surrounded by the bodies of his officers, still trying to give orders to ships that no longer existed. They treated him with respect, binding his wounds and giving him water before escorting him to the USS Liberty. Admiral Brooks was waiting for him in the command center. So was Captain Daniel Hayes, who had asked to be present for this moment. The room was quiet, filled with officers who had fought and bled and lost friends to reach this day. They watched the defeated commander with eyes that held no mercy but also no cruelty, just patience, just resolve. Zolthar stood before them, his silver skin stained with burns and his black eyes filled with confusion. "How?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "How is this possible? My empire has conquered hundreds of species. We have never lost a war. Never. You are primitives. You should have fallen in days." Daniel Hayes stepped forward. He looked at the alien commander, this being who had ordered the deaths of so many innocent people, and he felt a strange calm settle over him. "You conquered species that had known peace for generations," Daniel said. "Species that had forgotten how to fight. Species that valued survival above everything else. When you threatened them, they surrendered. When you hurt them, they submitted. That was all they knew how to do." He moved closer, his voice quiet but clear. "Humans are different. We have been at war with ourselves since we learned to pick up rocks and throw them at each other. Fighting is in our blood. It is in our bones. It is woven into every part of who we are. We have killed more humans than every alien invasion in your history combined. We have built weapons that can crack planets open and poisons that can end civilizations, and we built them to use against each other." Daniel's eyes never left Zolthar's face. "You looked at our world and saw prey. You should have looked closer. You should have studied our history. You should have seen what we do to things that threaten us. Because if you had, you would have turned your fleet around and never come back." Admiral Brooks stepped forward. "High Commander Zolthar, you are hereby taken into custody as a war criminal. You will stand trial for the murder of 400 civilians at Orbital Station 7 and for crimes against sentient beings across the galaxy. Your empire is finished, your fleet is destroyed, and your people will learn to live in a galaxy where humanity is watching." Zolthar was led away. He did not resist. The fight had gone out of him completely. Ambassador Threll arrived on the Liberty 3 days later, representing the Galactic Council. He had watched the final battle from a safe distance, and what he had seen had confirmed everything he had feared since his first meeting with Dr. Amy Carter. Humanity was not just another species. They were something new, something the galaxy had never seen before, a species born from violence, forged in conflict, and absolutely unwilling to be anyone's victim. The Council's message was simple. They wished to formally recognize humanity as a sovereign power and to establish peaceful relations. They also strongly recommended that no species ever provoke humans again. Brooks accepted the recognition with grace. He shook Threll's hand and promised that humanity would be a good neighbor. But Threll noticed something in the Admiral's eyes, something that made him nervous. Humans were not done. They had tasted victory, and they had found that they liked it. "What will you do now?" Threll asked. Brooks smiled. "Now we rebuild. We help the species that the Valorians enslaved find their freedom. We establish ourselves in this galaxy and make sure nothing like this ever happens again." He paused. "And we prepare. Prepare for what? For whatever comes next. Because something always comes next, Ambassador, and humanity will be ready." Back on Earth, Colonel Greg Patterson received the news in his bunker beneath the Rocky Mountains. The war was over. Humanity had won. He poured himself a drink and raised the glass to the screen, showing the celebration in the streets of every city on the planet. "Well done," he said quietly to himself. "Well done, everyone." He drank, and he allowed himself a moment of pride. His species had faced extinction and had not only survived but triumphed. They had proven to the galaxy that humanity was not to be underestimated. But even as he celebrated, a part of his mind was already working on the next problem. The Valorians were finished, but the galaxy was vast and full of unknown dangers. Somewhere out there, other empires were watching. Other powers were taking note of what humanity could do. Some of them would be afraid, some of them would want to be friends, and some of them, eventually, would want to test themselves against the species that had broken the Valorian Empire in less than a year. Greg Patterson finished his drink and got back to work. The war was over, but the future was just beginning, and humanity would be ready for whatever it brought. They always were.